Hello. Today we are going to walk through a short activity just on a couple of common problems that can happen with your starting system. And we're going to use that with the GTAFE Virtual Auto Expert on the zSpace platform. Now I went ahead and started the application, and under our engine module, I went ahead and found the starter model that you see here. And just a couple of notes. One of the common, maybe not so common problems is just the physicality, wear and tear on the starter. So if the connections are not tight, if the electricity or the current flow is not really, if it's not good and tight, that can cause some disruptions. Having some loose wiring or loose mounting bolts can also cause some issues. But let's pretend, you've had an engine leak, there's been some oil. If your starter gets too saturated, there's a lip right here. And when we go inside, you can see that sometimes oil can seep up in here, and that can also be detrimental to your starter because it can go ahead and infiltrate those bushings in there. So as it gets started, oil and electricity and getting those parts to flow through is probably not a good idea. So not as common, but just physicality could be an issue when talking about the starter. So let's pretend in this instance that you come out in the morning and you try to crank your car over, and it cranks, but it doesn't start. Yet you do have some accessories like lights and things like that that come on. So we went ahead and we tried to start the engine that you see here. And this was successful, but you can see here the ignition has to be initiated, and it goes through until, and it activates because you're pulling some power from the battery through the relay here when the ignition starts so that it will actually go ahead and start that starter. And if it doesn't crank over, then what's the problem? So one of the common problems is, one, there may not be enough voltage from the battery. So you definitely have to check that. You want to check your terminals to make sure that there's no corrosion up here and that these terminals are tight, because that all can mess with how that current flow is done and the starter is receiving that power. The other piece here is the starter relay, and if that goes out, it's a basic plug and play. It's helping to control that current flow, and so you can just unscrew that and replace that if need be. And there are ways to troubleshoot those through your multimeter and things like that. So we've looked at, now we know that there was some juice getting to the starter, but yet it still won't crank. So again, if there's enough power, then that should not be an issue. But one of the things, if there is enough power, and we're going to go ahead and show the starter trying to start, and we're going to look at the sectional view. So in here, there is the electrical flow of current. Again, if that's disrupted somehow or not getting to the solenoid switch, obviously the starter is not going to try to crank the engine over. This electromagnet, sometimes the solenoid switch, and there's ways to troubleshoot that, can go out. And the problem here is if this electromagnet isn't activated with this current, then the shifting fork will not engage, and then being able to push out this pinion gear, which is needed in order for it to connect with the flywheel. So as you see here, as this starter is starting, then here that pinion gear goes out to engage, and then it comes back in once it has engaged with the flywheel and cranked over the engine. So a couple of common problems is, your solenoid, like I said, the physical wear and tear, if your battery doesn't have enough juice, if there's not enough flow here to be able to get this electromagnet to activate, and again, getting this pinion gear to activate and come out. The other issue of, if you have some turnover and it's trying to crank with the flywheel and it sounds like it's grinding or it's got that whirring type of noise, in here, this pinion gear, just wear and tear itself also because of these teeth, could have some issues. So make sure that you also pay attention to that and the noises that are actually happening when you're trying to start your vehicle, because that could also be an indication of what's really going on. So thanks for your time today and talking about a couple of common problems with our starters.